wrote out my notes because these things happen.
I just don't know Google Slides. I know PowerPoint.
I know PowerPoint, not Google
And
Slides.
so we have
Yeah.
her notes, but we want to be able to let Diane see them, which I don't think you can. In other words,
It
you can
splits.
with PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's you split. It splits the
Oh, it
screen.
splits the screen. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it does.
Well,
Nice.
if I were the pro, I'd be able to do it right here.
Nice. Well, well. And so you're gonna go from here to the memorial, which is where?
No, no. I just get brushed today. It's
Oh,
in Church of the Chimes.
so the memorial's not till 3 o'clock, is that right? So Diane needs to have, oh yeah,
Yeah,
where
not
do you live?
not far from church. In
Another city?
North Holly, it's a Valley Village.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. You're not far.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hello.
thanks for
So,
coming.
thank you. Yeah, this is from Google Doc, Google Slides, and I want to be able to see my notes without the audience. So I want to be able to see my notes here. I think it has to split the screen. That's Diane trying to figure out how to do it.
Do.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Can you see this in there? Yeah, we want to make sure everything is.
All right. Should be all set.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Um, so you see, I can see my notes here,
Oh, that's gorgeous.
and then like this is the next one, and you guys all only see the. Do you need a cup of tea? I've got some more. So I don't know if you want to introduce or you want to.
I don't think it's time yet. What time is it? I think Judy, oh. Testing, testing, good. Oh, thank you. Oh, she can too. And then I can take this off and Judy and I will talk. Are we starting?
it's at 10. I think with the light. We don't get started until 10. But if they start. Okay, I don't even get to say take a seat. Aha, Deb. Fabulous. One, two. There should be a third. Can you tell me what the second, is it the 12th? The what in April? So I can announce.
My teacher. Testing, testing.
Second Wednesday?
We missed you with the class. Second Wednesday, April 9th.
Oh, good, good. Come in, come in. All right, sit down.
Be noticing that.
Yeah. You're with an E. Well, given the rain, I think we're a wonderful turnout. And even without the rain, we're a wonderful turnout. Each and every one of you, good morning. And so, welcome, community of engagement. We certainly do try. And I'm Judith Weissman, and happy to take us through and turn myself over to Melinda, who has been the connecting tissue with Diane this morning and has done such a thorough job. I want to just let you know that in April, the Watt in April will be Dr. Ken Fisher talking about the most current, he has written a book on sleep, and again, sleep. Without it, we're nowhere, as we know, but he's got current research and lots of anecdotal information, and I don't think we'll want to miss it. And then, of course, there's Dick Hutman at the end of the month on the fourth Wednesday at 10. And Jonathan Dober will be back in March. Isn't this, he's here now, or is it April? He'll be back in April with current events. And then, you know, our COE of Shabbat is happening on the 28th of March, Scott's class, and the 28th of March. And our guest is Alan Chapman, who will be talking about Jewish composers' influence on music. We couldn't have a more perfect person to do that. So please come back. And I'm turning this over to Melinda, and take it away.
Thank you, Judy. First of all, I just want to express my appreciation for all of you showing up, and also my love for those that I'm sure are streaming, and we hope that you'll be able to see the PowerPoint, because this will be a very fascinating program, and we're just hoping you'll be able to participate as best you can with us. I would like to do a little introduction for Diane Mizrahi, and talk a little bit about the flow of our program, and then we'll get started. Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming. Diane's journey as a librarian and researcher has taken her across the globe and more recently across world history. A Southern California native, Mizrahi graduated with her undergraduate degree in history. While living in Israel in the 1980s and 90s, she began a graduate certificate program in library science at Bar Ilan University and completed her required internship in the library at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. She completed her Master's of Library Science at Bar Ilan University in Israel and began working at UCLA in 2002, where she is currently the social sciences librarian and librarian for Jewish and Israel studies. Diane completed her PhD in Information Studies at UCLA in 2011. Diane's research has led her to groundbreaking work in helping libraries and institutions repatriate books that were looted by the Nazi regime in World War II, an issue not yet widely addressed by academic libraries in North America. She is currently working with her colleagues to establish a model for returning, and we will find out more about that as a group, this very engaged group later on, as a model for establishing and returning books to their rightful owners or countries of origin whenever possible. Diane has published nearly 80 academic articles, papers, book chapters, and book reviews, and has been an editor of publications for the European Conference of Information Literacy since its inception in 2013. Two of her articles on the reparation of Nazi looted books received a Literati Outstanding Paper Award from Emerald Press and were published respectively in the journals Judaica Librarianship and College and Research Libraries. So how did I come to find Diane? In May of 2022, Diane was invited to participate in a UCLA-hosted symposium, of which I'll be happy to give you the website of this program after our program, because it's still available online as far as I know, and it was fascinating. The symposium was titled Contested Collections, Grappling with History and Forging Pathways for Reparation. Reparation has increasingly, and this is from the symposium page I'm quoting, reparation has increasingly become an important topic in the museum, anthropology, and archaeology worlds. Yet it is but a blip on the radar in library and archive circles. In conjunction with its return of Judaica items to the Jewish Museum in Prague, the UCLA Libraries International and Area Studies Department hosted an online symposium featuring international experts who discussed, among other topics, the expropriation of artifacts through colonialism and war, the politics of ethics of ownership and restitution, and decolonization in libraries, archives, and museums. Diane joined the first panel session with two other scholars, telling the story of UCLA's reparation of Judaica books to the Museum of Prague, within the context of the Holocaust and the looting of Jewish cultural artifacts. That's what Diane is partially going to be sharing with us today. And so for the flow of our program, if you don't mind, what we'd like to do is let us go through the PowerPoint. If you can remember some of your questions, let her tell her story. Some of the questions that come up may be answered in the PowerPoint. And then we'll all get together, talk about our any questions that we have, share any stories that you might have and want to share, and then we'll circle back and let Diane close and tell us about a potential way in which we, as engaged Leo Beckers always, may possibly get involved in some of their research projects. Okay, so with further ado, let's have at it. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you, Melinda. You can hear me? Okay. And where did you get all that information about me? I mean,
I'm a librarian, like you.
great. Okay. Well, thank you all for inviting me to be here. I'm very passionate about this topic, and I'm excited to share my passion with you. I hope I can get some excitement and some engagement from you all. Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe I'll have to. Careful. Yeah, I do. Turn that puppy off. No, this is. Turn that one on.
It might double,
Yeah. Yeah. One less thing to worry about tripping over. Yeah. Got that?
Good thing I'm hardy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good. All right. So I'm going to share with you, as Melinda introduced, the story of how we discovered dozens and even more books in the UCLA library that were looted by Nazis during World War II, and what we are doing about that. We'll start with a brief historical review of the Nazis' policies towards Jewish and other literature, as they saw it as dangerous to their regime. Our discovery began with an inquiry we received from the Jewish Museum in Prague, and so we will discuss their project to rebuild their pre-World War II collection. Some big questions, of course, are how did UCLA obtain these books? What are we doing about it? And how are we using this case to raise awareness of this issue? We will then look at the particular circumstances of the Hebrew print collection held at the Terezin concentration camp, and some current projects and our hopes for the future. Finally, we will, and I'll open it up to you, we will discuss some moral and ethical questions surrounding the issues of provenance and repatriation. It gets very sticky and messy and obscure. Nearly 100 years before World War II, Heinrich Heine famously observed, "Where books are burned, in the end, people will be burned too." When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, they initiated a systematic libricide. That's a new word, the systematic destruction of literature, books, etc. A systematic libricide against any literature or author they deemed un-German. We're familiar with the Nazis' public bonfires of confiscated books, and while the emphasis was on Jewish works and authors, works by non-Jewish groups and ideologies, including the Freemasons, the communists, socialists, the occult, and thinkers such as Helen Keller, Mark Twain, Thomas Jefferson, Ernest Hemingway, they were all also confiscated and banned and burned. But the Jews have always been known as a people of the book. And by destroying our books, the Nazis sought to destroy our identity and our story as a people. Early on in the regime, the Nazis implemented a parallel strategy to their libricide, in which they sought to build institutions for the study of the Jewish question. At these institutes, Nazi scholars would study and interpret Jewish texts from their perspective to provide so-called scientific proof for their racial superiority and allow them to demonize Judaism and justify their campaign to annihilate the Jewish race. To provide resources for these institutions, they crated up their stolen books, what they didn't destroy, and sent them to various sorting centers throughout the Reich, where Jewish prisoners were forced to classify them by commercial or theological value. Books were selected for preservation or destruction in much the same way as prisoners at the death camps were selected to live or die. The Nazis' planned institutes and museums of extinct peoples did not come to full fruition, but as they stormed across Europe, their agents plundered millions of books and artifacts from public and private libraries and communities. This is a photo of the Nazi sorting center in Vilna, where Jewish prisoners, that is librarians, scholars, poets, etc., who were known as the Paper Brigade, risked their lives while they were sorting. If they came across something of immense value, they would hide them or smuggle them out, and that was obviously at their peril to their lives, in order to avoid their confiscation and destruction. And they are discovering some of these books that were hidden during that time. After the war, anybody speak Hebrew? Balagan? You know what a balagan is? Chaos, right? Hundreds of thousands of crates of books were discovered throughout Europe in abandoned buildings, caravans, monasteries, train stations, and elsewhere. To address the enormous challenge of dealing with these stolen books, the Allies developed policies to return them either to their owners, if they could find them, or their country of origin. The U.S. Army established the Offenbach Archival Depository outside of Frankfurt, which is pictured here, where a massive effort was made to find homes for the looted books. Jewish leaders, however, insisted that returning heirless collections to countries where entire Jewish communities were destroyed was unsuitable, and instead they should be distributed among institutions in the new centers of Jewish life, particularly in North America and Israel. Imagine a collection of books from a yeshiva in Poland. Well, the yeshiva was destroyed. The attendees at the yeshiva, the students of the yeshiva, were all annihilated. And perhaps members of the community, people in the town where the yeshiva was situated, were collaborators in that destruction. Why should we be sending these books into this vacuum, this cultural vacuum? Who would be there to curate the books? Who would be there to care for them? And who would be there to make sure that their stories lived on? And that's why the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction Organization took over operations when the U.S. Army left and continued their work into the early 1950s. And the JCR was headed by a major scholar, Salo Baron, as well as Hannah Arendt. Yeah. Besides the efforts exerted by governmental and non-governmental organizations, universities and other institutions sent their own agents to hunt and among the remains for additions to their collections. And there was a lot of paralegal, not quite legal actions happening as well. You can imagine people trying to take advantage of the situation in order to make a profit or take home a souvenir or whatever. As well, and book dealers were in on this too. So we did have book dealers and book agents scouring among the remains as well. So a little background about the Jewish Community Library in Prague, which was established in 1870, and by 1939, the collection consisted of approximately 30,000 books, manuscripts, and archives. It was one of hundreds of thousands that were looted and dispersed by the Nazis during the war. Today, under the administration of the Jewish Museum, has anybody been to the Jewish Museum in Prague? Great. They are trying to rebuild their pre-war collection physically based on their 1939 catalog. Ivan Kahut, the curator of the collection of rare printed books, searches through library catalogs, databases, and auction catalogs looking for lost items from their collection. In 2021, he was searching through HathiTrust, which is an online full-text database, and discovered 3 items from their catalog in the UCLA library. He then contacted me and asked for the return. Here are 3 of the volumes that Ivan found: Yesod Moreh, Hashorashim, and Tshuvot HaGaonim. You can see this is the title page, and you can see the stamps of the Jewish Community Library here. Bibliothek here. So how did these items find their way to UCLA? At UCLA, you know, we're a relatively young research university. We just celebrated our centennial 2019. But Jewish studies only began in the late 1950s. And the library urgently needed to expand its resources to support the curriculum and the growing research demand. We began a major purchasing campaign in the 1960s, which is apparently when we acquired these books in question. The most notable purchase was of the entire inventory of the Bamberger and Varman bookstore in Jerusalem, which was going out of business in 1963. This was comprised of 33,520 volumes, which became the core of our Judaica collection. And there's a whole backstory. The Israeli government didn't want all these books leaving. It had to go through Cairo. I don't know. I've heard a lot of rumors about that. Anyway, we got them. Professor Arnold Band, who just recently passed away a couple of months ago. He was able to secure the funding for this purchase through the Cummings family of Beverly Hills, and this collection is known today as the Cummings family, as the Cummings collection, and all of the books in that collection have a book plate. But the inquiry from Prague was, from the Prague Museum, was not the first request we got to return Nazi-looted material. In 2019, 2019, our previous university librarian, Ginny Steele, was approached by the Jewish Community Library in Munich, requesting the book, the return of a book from their library. Well, Ginny, I wasn't involved in this whole thing. I didn't even know about it. But Ginny consulted with various library administrators, and they could not find any policies, any guidelines in the professional literature, in the academic literature, for what to do when addressing material of questionable provenance in existing collections. Why? Well, that's a good question. Okay, provenance is the history of ownership. So it's very important, of course, in art. When somebody purchases or a museum purchases a piece, they want to make sure that it is not stolen. They want to be able to trace, oh, maybe this was owned by somebody of importance or historical, and so that adds to the value of the piece. So the provenance of the books would be the history of the ownership of the books, okay? And unlike art pieces, which can be worth, millions of dollars, except for the rare, very rare editions and historical works, most of the books we're talking about were printed in multiple copies. And so they don't have that same historical, they don't have the sexiness of a museum piece, so to speak. Okay, and so they went under the radar. I mean, since the end of the war, they've been all kinds of discussions and conferences and for the legal aspects of returning artwork and other properties. But books, kind of just because of the lesser value, monetary value, just kind of went under the radar with that. So Ginny and the administrators in our library, they developed a process for what to go through before returning the book. And with our Prague books, we followed the same procedure. And they consisted of verifying the ownership markings of the claimant, of course, looking at the book, ensuring that the item is digitized in the highest quality possible. This way, by digitizing these volumes, if we return it to their owners in Prague or wherever, at least we have a digital version and it's open to the world, it's out of copyright, so anybody in the world can go online and view the digital version. We have to update our own catalog to reflect the book's history and why the physical copy was removed, where it exists today. We want to check and repair if there's any damage before returning it. And then we return it by following the protocols for shipping rare materials. We did ask the Prague curators if they wished us to remove the markings of the UCLA library, and we were pleased that they said no, because the process of removing those markings could inadvertently damage the books, and the UCLA markings add to each book's unique history. So here you see examples of our verification process. Ivan Kahut sent me a copy of the page from their 1939 catalog. They have the catalog both in book format and card catalog. And you see up in the upper left over here, that's from the page. And then here's a enlarged picture of that same entry. This is the book in question. You see it's in French. It's a history of Jewish physicians. And it matches the catalog entry. You see this is a stamp, and just like as you know, stamps may change the Jewish Museum, the Jewish Library had 5 different stamps throughout their history, so it looks slightly different from the other stamps that you saw. And down here in the corner, in red, you see 7055, and here on the catalog, you see 7055. 1844. Yeah. Yeah, so this was enough evidence for us to decide that yes, this is theirs, and we can return it to them, and we're doing the right thing. In fall of 2023, I was able to visit the curators at the JMP, at the museum, and the photo on the right shows me with Ivan and Michal Bushek and Lenka, the head of the library. And on the left, this is their 1939 card catalog. So they do have them both. They were so fortunate that they were not destroyed by the Nazis during the war.
Were the card catalogs also taken and recovered, or were they left?
They were left. Yeah, there's a whole backstory of the Jewish, they were open, the Jewish Museum, which was separate from the library, but historically, but now they have oversight of that historic library today, post-war. The Nazis allowed the Jewish Museum to continue under their authority, of course, because that was one of the places where they brought their stolen loot and where they wanted to gather artifacts, relics from what they hoped to be an extinct people. So the museum itself was not as disturbed as other places that were totally destroyed. But their books were dispersed. When our Czech colleagues contacted us, we decided that the provenance issue was too important to keep quiet. So, as I mentioned, the book that we returned to Munich, I didn't even know about it. There was no publicity, nothing. But when we got this request from Prague, I said, wait a second, if this is happening with us at UCLA, for sure it's happening at other universities. I sent out an email on one of the librarian listservs, and I said, who else has dealt with this? And I got a few responses from University of Toronto, but nobody, there was no coordination, and as I mentioned, there was no set policy that people could go and view and use as a guideline. So we decided to publicize our efforts and to start dialogues with these other academic libraries on the topic. European libraries have been dealing with repatriation, especially in Germany, for years. But we found no evidence of discussion among North American libraries, and there is a difference. We in North America, and I'm including Canada, we are finding these looted books in our collection. The libraries in Germany are often, they were where these, the stolen books were sent, and so they're dealing specifically with repatriation. So there is a difference. So we engaged in several activities to bring attention to this issue. For example, we held a handover event in which we symbolically returned 6 books to the Czech ambassador, and that's the Ginny Steele and the Czech, he was the consul general, and myself. He didn't really take them because we had to return them through the protocols, but it was symbolic. We publicized it in various library and campus newsletters and social media. In 2022, as Melinda pointed out, the library held a 4-part online symposium in which speakers addressed this and other related topics, such as colonial histories and cultural sovereignty. And you can view these sessions on YouTube. My colleagues created an amazing online exhibit illustrating the story of the Prague books, and these can also be viewed. We have also published academic articles and have presented at several professional conferences. So we're getting the momentum going. But we are still finding material from Prague. I still have at least six more books that I know that we have to return to Prague. And as you see here, we've got books from the Jewish Cultural Center in Vienna, the Rabbiner Seminar in Berlin. This is the Krosner-Werner Bibliothek in Munich. This is a theological seminar in Breslau. And this book here, I'm going to talk about in a few minutes into more detail. So I have found more than 50 books like this in our collection, and I'm convinced that there are more, with this shelf tag. You see the J and the C. And then a number. This is the insignia of the Hebrew print collection at the Theresienstadt concentration camp outside of Prague. And this can serve as an example as to how books and collections were dispersed and rediscovered. Did anybody, those of you who have been to Prague, have you been to the Theresienstadt camp? Okay. So let's take a look a little closer. And this is at Theresienstadt. Terezin, which is the Czech name for the town, they don't like Theresienstadt, the German name. Terezin was built in 1780 as a garrison town by the Habsburg emperor and named for his mother, Teresa. There are two distinct sections, the garrison itself, which is smaller, and then the town. When the Nazis took it over in 1939, they used the garrison as a prison and removed all the non-Jewish residents from the town. They then began transporting Jewish prisoners from Germany, Bohemia, and other occupied lands, many of whom were from among the elite of their communities. I have a professor friend of sociology, and he was telling me that his great-grandmother was deported. She was a sister of Sigmund Freud, and she was deported from Vienna to Theresienstadt and then subsequently passed away. Yes? Yes. Well, yeah, but I wasn't going to point that out, so good. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, Leo Beck. The Nazis used Terezin as a model concentration camp, specifically for their propaganda purposes. The Red Cross came and they say, look how nicely we treat our Jews. They even made a film, The Fuhrer Gives the Jews a City. I have a copy of it. We have it on DVD in the library, and I checked it out. I had to buy a DVD player in order to look at it now. But it's fascinating, and you can see the library in this film and people reading books. So because of this propaganda value, they tolerated and even encouraged sporting and cultural activities. And imagine you have the creme de la creme of Jewish, certainly German and Austrian Jewry there. And so there were lectures and there were concerts and there were plays and they allowed a library to open as well. Now, of course, the town's population was in constant flux because prisoners were regularly transferred. New internees came in, and prisoners were regularly transported out to the work camps and the death camps. And then you had thousands of people who died in Terezin from disease and starvation and malnutrition, etc. So a ghetto library was established with books that they had confiscated from prisoners and looted from conquered territories. Reports estimate that around 200,000 books were handled during the 4 years of operation. And the whole operation is fascinating to me as a professional librarian. And if you can imagine, well, probably we can't, but the horrible circumstances in which the people found themselves, and to be able to read a book as an escape, as a way to leave their current environment and go into their mind just for a temporary time, was a tremendous advantage for those who were able to take advantage of that. And I'm in the process of doing more research into that. But the Hebrew print collection, however, was a separate entity. So you had the ghetto library, you had, and they supplied books. They actually had a mobile library that they would take books to the barracks, and the prisoners were able to use those books. They had whatever material they could, in like the hospital, in the children's areas, and the youth, etc. But there was also a Hebrew print collection, and which, like I said, was a separate entity. Books were sent from the confiscated collections that were already stored in Frankfurt and Berlin to Terezin, among other places, when the Allied bombing intensified in 1943. Prisoner librarians and scholars, who were known as the Talmud Commandos, were forced to sort and catalog them, and they were the ones who labeled these books, as you saw in that picture. The Czech National Library today offers access to, it's an incomplete collection of the catalog records from this Terezin print collection. After the war, books and other properties were sent from Terezin to the Jewish Museum in Prague, which served as a center for the restitution and distribution efforts. We saw that the US Army had their center primarily in Offenbach. There were other centers. Czech was under, obviously by that time, under the Soviet purview. And so that was another center there in, at the museum. So I know this sounds really complex. So I kind of made a map here. In 1933, the Nazis began looting, and we saw the bonfires. But among the ideologists, Alfred Rosenberg was the primary ideologist behind this. Let's set up these institutes for the study of the Jewish question. And so they began collecting these books that they had stolen, looted from the various libraries and institutions. And they stored them in Berlin and in Frankfurt. You had competing agencies. And in 1943, when the Allied bombing intensified, they sought safer locations. So they sent them to monasteries throughout Bohemia and to Terezin. And then simultaneously, of course, from 1939 till 1945, you have Nazis looting throughout Europe, especially in the East, in Eastern Europe. And along with that, you had their own sorting centers and their cache centers as well. We saw a picture of the sorting center in Vilna. So in 1945, in the post-war, this balagan, this chaos, you had millions of books and materials throughout Europe. What do you do with them? How do you return? And as I mentioned, the Jewish Museum in Prague was one center that books were sent to for the redistribution efforts, as well as the Allied sorting centers. And just a side note, the Soviets took, and the Russian government today, took the exact opposite approach to the redistribution and repatriation. They said, we defeated the Nazis, this is ours. And they had what they called trophy brigades to collect it, whatever they could find and send back to Petersburg or Moscow or whatever. And it's until this day, 80 years later, it's been very, very difficult. Only a trickle of material has been repatriated from the Soviet Union, from Russia. So from these Allied and the Jewish Museum in Prague centers, you had these repatriation efforts, redistribution, you had the open market, and they went primarily to Israel, the US, various Jewish communities and book dealers, and then they make their way to libraries, archives, bookstores, collectors, and among them, UCLA. Okay? I had to do that for me because it's like, whoa, so.
Here she's going
on. Yeah, before we get into this one, let me go back. Can you hold this? Sure. Please, no food or drink and clean hands.
Oh my goodness. Oh, move your, if you have a cup, Way down. Why did I think of these as giant books?
Well, some of them are. I took the lighter ones.
Did you have to pay for these? Did UCLA have to pay?
We bought them, yeah.
You bought them. And from whom did you buy them?
Well, some of them, if you open them up, you'll see the bookplate of the Cummings family collection. So some of them came in that collection. But primarily, and this is in the 1960s, you know, when the UCs were flooded with a lot of money and we could buy stuff. It was from just various book dealers.
It's interesting, ladies, to hear how they got it.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a two-part question. First of
Well,
all,
she was then.
how did they not get burned in November 8th?
In the Kristallnacht, yeah.
How did that happen? And secondly, there's an organization in New York that collects all of these. I'm sure you're in touch with them, and I'm racking my brain.
Evo? Evo? YIVO is one of them.
Fascinating. The paper's thin. Okay, no one can hear.
Okay. I'll get back to your question. So
When you don't want to do questions now as
Well,
they come, it's okay.
I just have a few
Any
more,
which
so
way.
this is fine. This is fine, just a little bit of a break.
Jody.
I wanted to just explain, and I'll get to your question in a minute. So you all see the JC and the number on the outside. So some prisoner in the Talmud Commando, some prisoner in Theresienstadt wrote that and cataloged it. Okay? And if you open, there is also, usually it's in red pencil, but it might be in just regular pencil, the same catalog insignia inside. Okay? And you can see, this is not a holy book. This is a translation from English to Hebrew of The Barber of Seville. So I guess The Barber of Seville, the opera. But I see here, somehow it made its way to Berlin, because I see the provenance stamp, the previous ownership stamp, and you might be able to see, some of these are from Vienna. I think there's one in which the provenance stamp was scratched out. I believe that it's probably from Vienna, just by looking at the stamp. So that's why I said it's so emotional to me, and it's become my passion, these books. And when my professor friend, and he took them, and he said, wow, maybe my great-grandmother handled one of these books, and it was very emotional for him as well. Yes?
I was told I need to do this, which I know better. I should have asked you the question so that the streamers could hear it. Is how these avoided being in the Kristallnacht burning of all the books. And the second question was answered by Lois Littman, who reminded me it's the Leo Beck Institute in New York. How I could forget such a name, I don't know, but I did.
Okay.
They are looking for this exactly.
Yes, that's the next part, my next PowerPoint. So, just to answer that first question, how did these escape the flames of Kristallnacht? Well, fortunately for us, there were many more books than they were able to get their hands on at that time. And after the book burnings of 1933, this made a huge stink in the papers in the world press. And the Nazis saw themselves as the height of cultural civilization. And yet, book burning, this is animalistic. This is not culture. And so it kind of gave them a black eye, if you want to say. And so that's when these ideologists, Alfred Rosenberg, who was tried in Nuremberg and was hung, he and others in the SS, they developed this idea for these institutes for the study of the Jewish question. So There were a lot of books that were destroyed, obviously, during the rampages. A lot of books that were deemed of no value or nobody who understood the value, they would send them to the paper mills. So probably more were destroyed than were saved. I don't know. It's really hard to estimate. I've heard one estimation of up to 100 million books and material throughout Europe were affected, either destroyed or dispersed or looted or whatever. It's really hard to get accurate statistics on that. But does that answer that question?
Question here and then there.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just yesterday finished reading the book, The Paris Library. I was
Oh.
wondering if you were familiar with it.
No, but now I have to read it.
Yes, it's
I love
about
Paris.
a library in Paris that stayed open during the entire war. It's a very fascinating story. I highly recommend it.
Okay, the Paris
and
Library.
they kept the library open, and they did send books to hospitals and concentration camps and many Jewish areas. So it's worth reading.
Okay, great, thank you. I could always use a read.
I'm interested in whether anyone has done an analysis of the types of books that people were reading and had at home before the ultimate war.
Oh, I love this question. The answer is no. But the question was, has anybody done an analysis of the reading habits and preferences of the Jewish communities in Europe before World War II? It would be a really difficult, I mean, that would be like the pinnacle of somebody's scholarship. But I can tell you at Theresienstadt, as I mentioned, the books that you have been handling were separate from their central library. And they, unlike libraries, you know, that say, oh, we need to purchase this book, we need to purchase that book. The patron comes and says, I want this book, can you get it for me? They didn't have that luxury. They had to deal with whatever books they were able to get from prisoners who were coming into Theresienstadt and their books were confiscated, prisoners who were transported out of Theresienstadt and their apartments were confiscated, whatever books they had. But the head of the Theresienstadt library, who was a professor, Utitz, Otto Utitz, I think, he was not particular that the books returned. There was a lending library, but he said, you know, the people are going to Auschwitz, they don't know what they're going to, they take a favorite book, and from the library, of course, it never gets returned, but he didn't realize that at the time, of course, and he says, you know, if it brings a reader joy, we don't need it back. And there was this constant flux of books, etc., and people. Now, there has been an analysis of the Central Library in Theresienstadt. That's not including these books, but what their genres were and how many they had. So they had holy books, and they had literature, and they had technical, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they had the whole gamut because they just took whatever came in. And the interesting requests were for books of leisure, like War and Peace was a highly requested book. The brothers Kamaraz, yes, because these were the escapist literature that they were looking for. And they also wanted books in their native language. So there was a limited number among the population who could read the Hebrew books and could appreciate the holy books.
Closer to home, UCLA, the focus on anti-Semitism and the work that is being penetrated on anti-Semitism. Two questions. What part are you playing, helping in this in-depth study?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, how are you funded? I know I'm not a setup, but is your funding through the UC system, or do you need outside?
Okay, so where do we get our funding? That's the library has funding, and each area study, so I'm Jewish and Israel studies, so we each get a certain amount. My funding is about, from that is about 50,000. And I'm very fortunate in that it's just a traditional Jewish cultural phenomena, is that I have endowments that people have set up that I use to purchase material as well. So through endowments, which almost doubles my allowance, and so that's, and I am told I have to spend my endowments, and so I get to shop. I have a, okay,
Wait a second.
yeah.
To be on a mic. This one doesn't travel.
And I'll get back to that later, but yeah.
Do you want to continue with the presentation and we hold our questions until the end?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I think she just nodded yes.
Diane said it's fine because she's doing great and she's getting.
I'm enjoying this. I'm loving your questions, so yeah.
Maybe since you're stationary.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
don't-
what we
you
do.
think it'll be
That's
okay?
our.
Yeah, I'm great.
Do you want me to hold my question then?
If you would, please.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just want to, somebody asked about the Leo Baeck Institute or whatever, and so I'm going to tell you about another project of which I'm particularly excited about, and this is a digital recreation of an historical collection. We discussed how the Jewish Museum is trying to recreate their historical collection in a physical way, and this is a recreation in a digital format. The Library of the Higher Institute for Jewish Studies in Berlin, which I refer to as the Hochschule, was founded, I think, in 1878. They did not allow Jewish studies at the University of Berlin. So Abraham Geiger and others created this Hochschule for Jewish studies, and it was for what in Europe they call liberal Judaism. Today we call it Reform here in the U.S. Their library contained about 60,000 books by the time it was closed by the Nazis in 1942. Now, why it was allowed to stay open until 1942, I don't know. But among the alumni of this institute was Leo Baeck. As well, he was not only a student, he was a lecturer, and then, I guess, sent to Theresienstadt. But the Leo Baeck, okay, so what was not destroyed from this collection has been dispersed around the world. And the seminary has never been reestablished, the historical seminary. But today's Leo Baeck Institute, which has branches in New York and London and Jerusalem, sees itself as the inheritors of the Hochschuler legacy. And they are the leaders in the study of German Jewry. However, they do not claim to be the rightful owners of the historical collection. And so they do not request the repatriation of books that are found around the world that belonged to that collection. What they are doing, librarians at the LBI in Jerusalem have engaged in a project which seeks to rebuild this collection digitally. They encourage libraries worldwide who find Hochschuler items to digitize them and to enter the descriptions into their database, thus creating a database and a digitized version of this historic collection. Now, we have found some Hochschuler books in our collection, and we've entered them into their database. And I have literature on the table over there because the Leo Baeck Institute is looking for citizen scientists, which could be any of you, to engage in this kind of historical research on your own. And so there is information on how to go about doing that. They have a prize-winning website that you can visit, and I see this as an exemplary model because, as we're going to get into, provenance can get sticky and messy. It's a whole Pandora's box of questions, morality and ethics and et cetera, et cetera. So here, it eliminates that question of repatriating a book, but you still keep the stories of the books alive, and a scholar could go onto the, it's called the Library of Lost Books. They could go onto the database and say, oh, here's the book digitized online, I can use it here. Or they could say, oh, I see it's held at UCLA, and then they could go and use the physical book at UCLA. So I'm very excited about that, and if you have a chance to visit their website, and if you want to do your own research, it would be certainly welcome.
Any questions about what we just talked about?
No. I'd like to, it's about provenance, and it's about, you mentioned, I'm still interested in knowing a bit more about how you receive the books and find them. From what you've already said, it sounds as though somebody, a family member somewhere, comes to you and says, I have books. Is that right?
That's one way, but I don't want to open the floodgates. In general, we don't take, like people say, oh, my great uncle passed away, here are his books. Only if there are historical or unique items in that collection. We don't need another prayer book or version of the Talmud or whatever. We actually have an amazing Judaica collection. We've got Perusha Torah from the Ramban Nachmanides from Lisbon from 1478. It was the first book published in Lisbon.
Huh.
We've got that. We've got the first publications of the Talmud, 4 Masechtot, Birnbaum Talmud from the 1520s. So, and every once in a while I do exhibits. I can't bring them here. Don't tell my my bosses that I brought these.
It's on the DL.
So
But,
I'm,
yeah.
another piece to that.
Yeah.
So do you know where these people who have these rare books, where they have gotten them?
That's a very good question. Usually it's handed down family to family, and then it gets it as a donation. I took over from my colleague David Hirsch as a librarian for Jewish and Israel Studies in 2018. I started working at UCLA in 2002, but I was doing reference and instruction all this time, and even my doctorate is not in Judaica, it's in information studies. But when David left, they knocked on my door and they said, oh, you speak Hebrew, can you do this? So I said, yeah, I'll do it. So in my time, I haven't had anybody come up with a valuable, like that kind of piece. But the core of our Judaica collection, including these books in question, were purchased in the early to mid-1960s. And unfortunately,
From?
book dealers from this Varman and Bamberger and Varman bookstore, a lot of horse trading, and you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
Just a
Hold
second.
on. We have a question.
So following up on that, who was the Cummings family? And then I have another question.
The Cummings family was Theodore Cummings, and from Beverly Hills, and it was Mrs. Cummings who, in honor of her husband. And I think one of these books has the book plate. Did anybody see?
Yes, that's what I had.
Yeah, yeah. So it was in his honor, and I was in touch with somebody from Temple Beit Am in L.A. And I think Beth Am, and they were active in that temple there. So I don't really know much else about them, but yeah.
So my second question goes back quite a bit in the presentation, but you said that you would ask people who wanted them if you could clean them up, preserve them, and were you conserving them or were you preserving them?
That's a great question. What's the difference between conservation and preservation? And we actually have a conservation preservation lab at UCLA. It's in the basement of Powell Library. And so there is such a thing as bookworms, real
Yes.
bookworms that that bore through them, and all kinds of jukim and all kinds of things. And there's mold. Things fall apart. Rebinding. I am assuming that we have more books like from the Theresienstadt, but because they lost their covers, where the tape was, or where the penciled catalog record was, that I can't identify them as being from Theresienstadt, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have many more. So the preservation, the conservation, things happen, fires, as we know, floods, and things fall apart. So it's a whole science. It's an incredible branch of librarianship, and yeah.
Just to alert you, and maybe you know, and maybe there's more, but in the Cummings book that I was looking through, there's one page that is not attached. So I wouldn't want it to get lost.
Right. So that's the kind of thing that they can repair. Yeah. And obviously it's not just books. It could be audiovisual. It could be, music. It could be all kinds of things. Yeah.
Thank you.
The library, or the section that you said was available, well, it has the books like the Maimonides book and so forth. Is that available for coming in and viewing?
Yes.
And does one need special permission before that? And you have
Yes.
to wear gloves and... and I'm
there's a
just
controversy about gloves, depending on the item, because the gloves can be very cumbersome, and they can inadvertently tear pages, and so cause more damage. But so in general, I haven't used gloves with various items, but yes, these are held in a section of our library called Special Collections. And in order to use Special Collections, you have to register and then make an appointment, and then you can only view it on the premises.
Do you do that online?
Yes, yeah.
And you're at Powell Library?
The preservation is at, the preservation lab is at Powell, but I'm at the Young Research Library, and that's where most of the Judaica is, including the Special Collections. Let me just get through a couple more things. This is almost the end. This is me. This is when I was in Prague in 2016, and this is a survivor from Theresienstadt. She was a child at the time, and she worked at the Altneu Schule and gives talks, and so I had my picture taken with her. So just some hopes and goals for the future. So I gave a talk 2 years ago at the Association of Jewish Libraries, AJL, about the discovery of these books, and pretty much what I spoke with to you today. And other libraries and other academic institutions are saying, hey, we've got some of those too. We've got some. And so we formed a task force, and we are librarians from Brandeis University, Towson, University of Toronto, Denver, University of Denver, Columbia, as well as ourselves. Our situations are slightly vary. They're not all the same, but we're working on this dialogue that we've been wanting to do, and coordination for what to do when you find these things in your collection. So raising awareness, and one of the things we want to do is create standardized cataloging records. Do you say Terezin or do you say Theresienstadt? So that when one person comes to do the research, they'll know which authority word name to use. And that way there are, across the board, but there's a catalog called WorldCat, which searches multiple libraries at once. So if somebody were to do a search on WorldCat looking at the record or in the field of provenance and searching Terezin or Theresienstadt, they could find not just UCLA, but any other, or hopefully other libraries that have these. And that would encourage the scholarship. since, let's see, in 2024, UCLA created a policy and guideline for what to do about provenance, and it goes beyond just Judaica. You know, we're talking about a whole civilization out there. What do you do, and how do you check, etc. And the AJL, together with the National Library of Israel, collaborated on creating a white paper titled Cultivating Best Practices in Judaica Provenance. And so these documents are resources, and other institutions are using them to model their, or to create policies for their own institutions. Almost done. This slide just gives a bibliography. These are the two articles that we've published so far. You see, I was able to do it with Ivan and Mikal. This CNN interviewed me. They got hold of ear of this, and in December they wrote about not just UCLA, but also the Leo Beck initiative. So that's in there too.
And that's the article that we printed out today. So that's.
And then this is the link to the symposium and the link to the online exhibit. So. Oh, Melinda will help you get copies of these articles if you want, by request, or yes.
Laura.
So now, I don't know how much patience you all have. So we've discussed some questions about ownership rights, but let's look at it from a broader perspective, and why is this so sticky, and why is it such a Pandora's box and controversial? I have spoken to librarians in private institutions. One in particular told me, we've got some Prague books, but our board of directors will not allow us to return them. So you have issues there. We bought them, you know, they don't want them returned. And when I gave a talk at a library conference, a general library conference, a couple years ago, somebody came up to me afterwards and he said when he was a librarian at Duke University, they were approached by an attorney from Greece representing a Greek monastery, and they found that Duke was holding, I think it was 11th century, 12th century holy book that had belonged to this monastery, and but it was stolen, and they demanded it back. Well, Duke could trace their sale, and they could trace the previous sale, but somewhere in that murky history, it had been stolen, and they, going through legal advisors, they realized they had to return it. So, a good friend of mine, the head of the libraries at the University of Oregon, she was very excited about, they got a collection of photographs of a local indigenous tribe. And they were so excited, and they published this or publicized this up on their website. And eventually somebody came to them and said, you know, I'm from that tribe, and there are people in these pictures who are still alive. Did you get their permissions? Who do they belong to? Okay. Has anybody heard of the Iraqi Jewish archive? This is typical of the kind of question that arises. In 2003, during the Iraq War, American soldiers found a whole, I think it was like 50,000 items of Judaica, Jewish records from the Iraqi Baghdad Jewish community going back to the 1500s. And it was in a house of Saddam Hussein. So with the interim government's permission, the interim Iraqi government's permission, they took all of those items to the US, to I think it's the National Archives, and digitized them with the understanding that they would be returned. Well, now the Iraqi government says we want those items back. But it's raised a major question. Whose history is that? Is it Iraqi history, or is it Jewish history? Is it Jewish Iraqi history? There's a museum, I think it's in Hulon or Bat Yam, Museum of Iraqi Jewry. My husband and I were there. My husband's family is from Arbil in northern Iraq. And we found it fascinating. That's, in my opinion, that's where that archive should go, because it belongs to the Iraqi Jews. But the Iraqi government says, no, it's Iraqi, it's Baghdadi history. These were citizens of our country. So, again, whose history is it? It's still in the US right now. Well, then what do you do if it's a place where, like Ukraine right now, and you return it and it's endangered? But who's to decide what's an endangered place? By what standards do you say this? I mean, by most of the world's standards, Israel's an endangered place. We're all in danger. Can you imagine? Oh, one more example. Let's say somebody from the Cuban diaspora. They were a prominent, I'm making this up, but it could be. They were a prominent family in Cuba. They fled the revolution. They brought all kinds of documents with them to the US. And they're ready to donate them, these documents, to an institution. But family members of the owner, you know, the cousins, the second cousins, et cetera, they say, hey, you didn't get our permission to sell that. We, you know, again, so you have this family conflict. Or perhaps there's information in those documents which may incriminate people still in Cuba or Korea or Vietnam or wherever. Okay? So again, you have these ethical issues that have to be weighed and discussed, and it's beyond my ken. You know, but that's what these are the kinds of things that we have to consider, and that's why not every, as we discussed, not every looted book or stolen book is a candidate for repatriation. There's I wrote Timbuktu here. There's a book, I think it came out in 2012, called The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. And it tells the story, the true story, of a historian, a librarian, who was able to save thousands of historical Islamic manuscripts from, I'm not sure if it was ISIS or who was coming in. There was this threat, and they were able to smuggle it within the country. They kept it within the country, but out of Timbuktu. And when that threat dissipated, they brought it back, and now they're in the process of digitizing. So here is a successful rescue of a collection by somebody from that community. So again, the great white man saving humanity, it raises all kinds of questions. And here's my last slide. Thank you very much, and happy Purim.
So I have one final question, unless someone else has a question. Okay. She's Laura. Just if we want to sort of come a little bit boots on the ground, just perhaps, I keep thinking in terms of all of folks that are mastering in genealogy right now, looking for their historical roots. And there's something like WorldCat that most folks don't know about that's publicly accessible, and wondering whether or not there is this sort of side thought going on amongst us of, wow, I wonder if my family history has any books, or I knew of something, and I wonder where it might be. What could one do if they were curious to do some of their own sleuthing?
That's a good question. If they knew of a specific book, I mean, they could search the online catalogs and, again, auction catalogs, et cetera.
And WorldCat, possibly?
WorldCat, yeah, it's an online catalog. If it was a prominent member of a community, one of the books in here has a book plate that the book was donated to the community, I think it's the Viennese Community Library, by a specific person, one of the smaller books. Anyway, so, you know, if the person was a prominent member of a community, hopefully the library has included that in their catalog record. That's what we're pushing. UCLA hasn't done it yet. That's what I'm pushing them for. The low-hanging fruit is get those catalog records up to date and as descriptive as possible so that people can do that kind of research. So that's one way. It's not so easy, but like the German...
That's an answer. You know,
the German
it's not so
libraries
easy.
they are interested in finding these owners, and so they do try to repatriate, and there are records, instances of somebody in getting a book back of their grandfather, and you know, it's a very emotional, it's the only thing they have from that grandfather, and so it's a very huge thing. But sometimes a family will be notified, we've got this book, it belonged to your ancestor, would you like it back? And they say, well, it's more important for us that it be curated properly and available to the public. So you keep it in your library, just make sure that you include all of this story in your provenance, in your records, in your catalog, so that these stories do not get lost. Because it's a way of keeping our family, keeping our people and their stories and their books alive.
Beautiful. And we're looking for books while we're doing our last questions. I just want to make sure that we're collecting them. Thank you.
I had a few questions. First, a couple of things that struck me. One, as a graduate of the Baltimore Hebrew College, I know that they collapsed their library collection, which was quite extensive, into Towson.
Exactly.
Which is why all of that, why you mentioned Towson, so I was delighted to hear that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was remembering as you were speaking was that my mother was quite involved with Brandeis University, and as a child, I remember the Brandeis University Women's Committee would have these annual sales to help support the university, and they would collect donated books. So the folks who were involved in that, and I remember doing this with my mom when I was like 10, maybe, we would go through the donations, many from the Jewish community, and identify items that might be of interest to the librarians at Brandeis. And then if we had enough in Louisville, Kentucky, they would send a librarian to us to review what we had, we had, and they'd actually take it back and collect it. So I wonder if that kind of thing is still happening. Is anyone doing that kind of work with private collections?
Maybe on a small scale. In general, in libraries worldwide, we are so pressed for space.
Yes.
We've
And
been-
then, speaking of space, the other thing I wondered was the new facility of the National Library in Israel.
Yes.
Is that creating some new opportunities for this kind of work?
I was just there in May. I went to a conference, and it's beautiful. And I don't know, but we have been in touch with them. I mean, yeah. So, yeah.
So this makes me think about a book that I have. First of all, when my father died, he had about 200 books in Yiddish. And I didn't know what to do with them. This was in '93, and I remember I had to send them to New York somewhere.
Yeah, there's a Yiddish.
Somebody, yeah. But he left, or I have, a book about the shtetls in Poland, and there's a section about my grandmother, who used to, girls didn't go to cheder, so she used to teach girls in her home. But it's not an original book, and I don't even know what date is in it. I haven't looked at it in a long time.
Yiddish?
But it's in Yiddish. And she gave birth to my father when she was 50, and that was in 1900. So she was born in 1850. But so somewhere between 1850 and 1900, this book was probably printed. but it looks like a regular book, you know. I don't know. I mean, I would like to keep it in the family because of just, but I mean, she's not a well-known person, but she is to the family.
First of all, that's your choice. If you have family that is interested and would want to take it, then you know, your grandchild, your whoever in your family, fine. If there's the family says, you know, it would be better to be in an institution, then I mean, I just got an email yesterday. I do Jewish genealogy. I have all kinds of genealogical books. Would you be interested in them? My answer, and then while I was away on break, I came back to my office because I also do poli-sci. I had 3 boxes of books of poli-sci, but the professor was very organized. We have to check each one to see if we have it in the catalog. I can't take duplicates. If we already have it, I can't take it. And even if, say, Berkeley has it, I can't take it. Again, we're just so pressed for space. And, oh, don't get me started, because that YRL is a death trap.
I had 2 issues of this book. The family had it, and one of my cousins gave me one because I couldn't find mine. But my daughter wanted one, so then there's an extra one. So would you be interested in?
If we don't have it in our collection, then yes.
Oh.
And
I
I
have
can
to
help you
check
get
our
in touch
catalog.
with Diane.
Yeah, I have to.
I'll help you get in touch with Diane, and you could do this offline.
If you have books,
I'm not sure when
if
this
you
is
have
supposed to
books,
end.
what we ask is that you make a list of the titles and the authors, and it's even best if you or somebody else can go through the UCLA catalog and see if we have it.
I know the name of the book.
Well, it's possible. We can do that maybe at another time, but yeah. But that's Special Collections has even told us that they're because they're so pressed for space, they can't take gifts, and so we're stuck in a catch-22. I have all these funds, I have to spend money, but then I'm told, oh, but we don't have space, and you have to justify, and we can't take duplicates, and so one of my favorite things that I've been buying in Special Collections are what's called editos. These are Italian proclamations. Most of them are from Ferrara and Mantua. The earliest ones are from the 1500s, and they give a picture of Jewish and non-Jewish relations in that community at that time. So one proclamation says, all Jews must wear a yellow insignia. All Jews must live separately from non-Jews in a separate area, the ghetto. Or Jews may not throw candies during their celebrations because it's dangerous. Jews must also volunteer for the community fire department. Just amazing, fire brigade, just amazing little pictures. Of course, they're in Italian for the most part. But I really love them. First of all, they're light, so they don't take up a lot of space. But also, unlike a book about Jews in Mantua or in Ferrara, they are artifacts of that community, of that life, and so they really do bring it alive. So unless anybody's got some editos from the 1500s.
You never know. If there are more questions or comments, this is it. We're not rushing. We're not pushing you out the door. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Conservation and preservation were mentioned, and is that a difference without a distinction? A distinction without a difference? But what is the difference between conservation and preservation?
I have to bring in my colleague. She's amazing. She does talks. Thank you. I would not be the best person to define that. I can, what my husband calls mocha rugelach. It's a short word for BS. You know, when you just make it up.
Don't. It's sufficient.
But I've heard it. It hasn't sunk in, and I can't answer your question in the correct way.
Okay.
Fair enough.
There is a difference. I can tell you that. Yeah.
Roy, hand the mic to Eve behind you. One of those important questions.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the place where they, in Powell Library, where they
No, not special collections. Where they mend the books or the?
That's the Conservation Preservation Lab.
Oy vey. Oh, okay.
Yeah. In Powell Library, in the basement.
Conservation, preservation, okay.
Yeah, and it's under, lock and key. You have to press a buzzer to get in because they have all kinds of valuable things. I was in there a few weeks ago, and I found a book plate from the Library of Moses Montefiore. It's like, wow, how did we get that? And so they're the ones.
If we had, we have some books of my father's that are first editions from a long time ago.
Mhm.
Would we be able to take them in and have them?
No, you'd have to go to, not to
Okay.
art, unless you were giving them to us.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
It's specifically for UCLA books, and we're very fortunate. Not all institutions have that on the premises, and so they have to outsource it.
Okay.
But we have.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So the Leo Beck Institute is sponsoring this citizen program.
Mhm.
And the next step for those that might be interested would be to contact whomever is on this information sheet about getting involved in the Library of Lost Books. Is that correct, Diane?
Yes.
All the
I can
information they
even bring
need?
up the
And I know everyone's itching to find out whether or not, I know some people have actually gone, whether or not there might be the idea of a field trip involved in this someday. Over to you. The possibility. No promises necessary.
I do exhibits. You would have to come to us, like I said. Yeah, but I would be happy to do it. So we can arrange that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it would be in the
you
Young
don't want the
Research
card?
Library.
Yes.
We have a nice classroom in
sounds
the
like a great
basement there,
project.
which is right next to the special
See you
collections,
soon.
and
I'm so
yeah,
glad you came.
a show and tell.
Really, really
You
nice.
probably hear some of the same stuff I just said. But
I'm gonna
And
see if I
when
can
would
get
the
it back
next
for Young
exhibit
Mood.
be? Do you have a
I
sense?
have-
Exposed.
It's okay, no
We'll see.
pressure.
As soon as you make a date.
She's adorable.
Okay, fair enough. Oh,
Well,
gosh, we've loved having you, and you've shared so much with us. And I have so much to tell the people who couldn't be on stream and couldn't be with us, who really wanted to be here with you today.
And I'm
Thank you,
hoping that
Melinda.
segue that I might be able to talk you into coming back for Yum Lamood next spring. People would love you. Would love you. Yeah.
Oh, well, you might hear the same stuff, but maybe I'll.
Well, we've got how many members? And I'm sure that now it just allows the
700.
rest of the folks here today to go to somewhere else and not have to have the dilemma of making a choice. But I think that the others that could possibly benefit from hearing your stories would be remarkable. So thank you so much for being here, and we love you.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Anytime I get a chance to share my passion, I'm here. Yes.
Jewish.
Yes.
A friend of mine, husband wrote a book. He's Iraqi Jew. They have it in the LA Public Library. I got it.
Oh.
He might be. It's about the Jewish community and living there and getting out around the wartime. So I just recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just get it from
I
Public
always have
Library. They've got
copies.
it in the history department.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, hello. I said to some of you in an email that I have some, now I can't think of it. What did I offer you? Collagen, thank you. I have a few left that I'm giving away. 2 have vanilla cream flavor. Do you want some collagen powder? Collagen powder, good for nails and hair. And I'm giving them away because I have some other ones. So,
Got bad nails. So let me.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
Maybe it'll help.
This is wonderful. You are wonderful.
She's wonderful.
Great.
reading preferences, if